His backbone and jaw came from the early fish. His limbs and lungs from amphibians.
Sorry, I should explain that I've cut this clip out. He's talking about the ancestry of a human being. You'll see at the end of the clip. So when he says he has these features from, he's talking about a human being.
The reptiles gave him his watertight skin. Tiny nocturnal mammals donated a bigger brain, sharper senses, and the manner in which he was born. His hands and colour vision came from the fruit-eating primates, and his larger brain and greater intelligence from the first humans.
So all our features of our body can be traced back to our ancient ancestors, and there's much more we have yet to learn about them. But one thing is certain, the evolution of the vertebrates has not yet come to an end.
Okay, and click number 2.
You might think that this orangutan is washing socks as some kind of service trick for which she's been specially trained, but not so. She is doing this entirely on her own initiative. She's seen others doing it, and she's copying. And that ability to imitate, as well as to use tools, is something which started among monkeys, but has been brought to a much greater level among the apes. And those two talents will ultimately lead to the transformation of the world.
Camp Leakey in Borneo is home to a special group of orangutans who have been rescued from captivity and returned to the wild. Because they've lived partly in our world as well as theirs, they can give us an insight into what we have in common. This old lady loves DIY. So does her son, who was born in the wild. Even her infant is interested.
Very striking when you sit as close to an orangutan as this to see how similar they are to human beings. We are both, of course, great apes. But look how human her hand is. The skill with which she picks things up. The way that she can grasp a tool like that. The way she uses her brain to imitate what she's seen others doing. And oddly enough, the fact that she is clearly left-handed. Great apes share with human beings a predilection to use either the right hand or the left hand. And she's left-handed.
But the most important thing we share is our big brain. It's that that has produced so many of the talents and abilities that we have in common.
Yes, so big brains. One of the biggest things that distinguishes us from all the other members of our family is that our brains, compared to our body size, are vastly bigger, and their surface area of our brains is far greater even than the brain size, because it is more heavily convoluted, increasing the surface area inside the skull. So how did our ancestors get those big brains? There have been a lot of theories over the years, and to share with you the fact that although most of this course is historical, new theories are still coming up. And so the one I'm going to discuss today is new, is one that's going on right now being debated and worked on by scientists at this moment. The cooking ape hypothesis. The hypothesis being how we got our big brains, and only us, was that our ancestors started eating cooked food. Now that might sound kind of silly at first, but the science behind it is actually very compelling. This is the work mostly of a primatologist named Richard Wrangham, who wrote the book Catching Fire, which I'll mention later. And it is very, very interesting, I think. Anyway, so this is the same question that he addresses. How did we get from just apes, like Lucy, and Lucy was an Australopithecus afarensis, as you will all remember, I'm sure. And she's just an ape, even though she walked on 2 legs. She's not human, okay? Small brain. So why did that one lineage go in a particular direction? The oldest and the most prolific hypothesis to date has been that it was meat eating that did it. That our ancestors didn't eat just fruit like other primates, but began eating meat. And we know from the cut marks on bones that these early creatures made with primitive stone tools that they were eating or butchering meat at least 2.6 million years ago. So meat eating goes way, way back. Which is interesting to those who want to debate the philosophical question about, is meat eating a mistake? Ought we not to eat meat? Are we supposed to be vegetarians? Scientifically speaking, no, we are omnivores, kind of like pigs and dogs. They're omnivores too. That is, we eat and digest both plants, or we can. And we have the teeth and the digestive system to tackle both. And as you know from an earlier lecture where I played you a clip of chimpanzees hunting and eating those cute little monkeys, meat eating is not exclusive to our lineage. So one might question whether that is enough to make the difference, since the other chimps eat meat. Okay, so this is these are the slides, Richard Wrangham's actual slides I'm showing you, with all these different reasons why meat eating could have led us to evolve the way that we did. Such as, we know that meat eating goes very far back, that humans do it and so forth. I won't go into all the details on the slides, but the conclusion is that it was that the existing theory, or the previous theory, was that no other food could explain the human big brain but meat, because it's super nutritious and has lots of ingredients important for our bodies and so forth. Okay, so here's Wrangham's thesis. I should say that Richard Wrangham is a primatologist. He's an expert on chimpanzees. And I said in a very recent lecture something about how sometimes outsiders make the biggest innovations. Remember that? This is another case. He is not a paleontologist. He's not someone who specializes on the fossils and the reconstruction of the evolution of the human species. So he's kind of got a foot in both fields, and that's why he has a lot of critics who think, oh, come on, this isn't your field, you're not an expert. We are. How can you come up with this grand theory to explain what made us special? Of course, they don't like it. People never like it when an outsider makes a big discovery or innovation in their field. And that's happening here. So, this is how it works. Starting off with principle number 1, that something that almost none of us ever thinks about, or that no one ever realized or ever stressed in the literature before, just that eating cooked food is a human universal. All races and groups of humans on Earth subsist on cooked food. As soon as I say that, you might be skeptical. I was when I first heard Wrangham lecture on this. wait a second, what about sushi and sashimi, and what about the Eskimos? Didn't they eat raw seal? Things like that. But it turns out that, well, sushi is actually mostly cooked rice. So with a tiny little tidbit thrown in, so it's still cooked food. And the other things are basically occasional treats and delicacies. No one lives off sashimi, or the Eskimos didn't live off raw seal. They cooked their food, and only on hunting expeditions on the open ice, when they ran out of cooking fat, the cooking oil, would they eat some raw meat. And of course, this is such an unusual thing that people always talked about it, that the Eskimos eat raw meat. Oh my God! Ugh. But yeah, so it turns out there are no people on Earth who live on in this way. So that immediately comes the question: aha! Well, if it is shared by all groups, then obviously all the living humans today, the earlier humans, must have had it. All right, since it's been distributed to all groups on Earth. You can't say that, for example, about canoes or bow and arrow or other things, right, which evolved much later in individual places and are possessed in some groups but not others. Cooking is everywhere. Oops. Also, Brigham did an extensive search of the historical and current literature looking for any examples of any human beings ever recorded to have lived a long time on raw food. And he couldn't find any. This book here, Alexander Selkirk, he's the person that Robinson Crusoe is based on. He was a real person stranded on an island for years, but he could make fire and he cooked his food. The oldest example that Ryan could find was a lady who had lived in the South American forest. I think she escaped from a tribe of Indians and ran off into the forest. And she lived for 6 months in an abandoned banana plantation full of ripe bananas. That was the longest case he could discover of people. So most of the time when people get shipwrecked out at sea, one of the things that they die from, usually it's dehydration, but also that they can't get enough energy even if they can get, say, raw fish or birds or whatever, just eat them. People can survive for maybe a month or so, but they don't last long. So you might wonder why that is. And then you might be wondering, wait a second, aren't there people who claim to live on a raw food diet? The raw foodists, as they're called. And this is one of their books, isn't it? Check it out. Nature's First Law, the raw food diet, and there they are, dare I say it, aping around in the tree. No, the important thing to recognize about these people who claim to live only on a raw food diet is they only live in modern cities, where we have the advantage of no seasonal availability of foods. So ripe foods from all different parts of the world are constantly available. This is never true in nature, of course, right? If you're a hunter-gatherer. And they're eating domesticated things, domesticated plants, which are gigantic compared to their wild ancestors thousands of years ago. And they're far more digestible, they contain far more sugars, they're far more nutritious than anything that existed in the ancient past. Okay? Secondly, these people are not lab rats, so they do not live in a laboratory, so we can't actually prove that they live only on raw food. Some of them eat a little bit of cooked food and most of the time raw. So we can't test this very well, but some tests have been undertaken on groups of people who claim to live on raw food. Here's one of these people, Angela. And there's a picture of Angela on the top left, eating cooked food, feeling heavy, and then there she is on her eat raw diet, looking rather cute. So, but the problem is that the study that analyzed these raw foodists found not only do they lose loads of weight, but in fact they are not getting enough energy, despite the fact that they eat all they want, whatever they want. They eat huge quantities of raw food. And this is the most shocking statistic of them all. This little graph here shows that approximately 50% of the women becomes infertile. They cease to menstruate, which is a sign of starvation. That happens to people in concentration camps who are starving to death over a long period from being given a very low diet. So hunter-gatherers in the ancient past who could not have had access to any of the wonderful food these people have access to, and would have had to only been able to eat what was seasonally available, right? Could not possibly have done that well as these people living in modern cities are doing. But this rate is not evolutionarily sustainable. Any group of people who had a drop of fertility like that would die out. That is not sustainable. So I think this completely demolishes the case that we ought to really be eating raw food. That's really the natural thing for us. That's wrong. Eating raw food is not natural for us, because that's what happens if you try. You lose masses of weight, and you don't have enough energy, and other important things. We are in fact adapted to eat cooked food, which is why all human beings in the world do so. Oh, and just a side note, this one kind of amuses me. There's a lot of health food products out there that claim that they have living enzymes. And this is really good for you because you need living enzymes, right? You've all heard this, it's important. Well, okay, but the idea that you can buy a product and pour them down your throat is wrong. Enzymes that you pour down your throat are utterly destroyed by your stomach. It's called digestion. You cannot intake them by drinking them. Almost everything that you eat does get this, anything alive that you were to put down your throat will be destroyed. There are very few exceptions, like there's some of these, there's some kinds of bacteria and so forth. But normally, when something you eat is alive and goes into your stomach, it's called food poisoning. It's unusual. It's not the norm. Usually things are killed by chewing them out or in the acid bath of your stomach. So no such thing as living enzyme, I'm afraid. Don't trust any of these products. They promise great things. No. Okay, so Rangam argues that one of the big consequences of eating a cooked diet is that the human digestive system, he uses the word guts for short, and so I'll follow him. Human guts are much smaller than all of the other apes. And they're quite small for an animal of our body size. Why? Because our cooked food diet is very different from a raw food diet. It's greatly softened, and cooking is, in effect, a form of pre-digestion. Because energy has been applied to the food to break down the cell walls, and do all sorts of other chemical changes to the food before you ingest it. So your body doesn't have to do all of those things that it would have to do if you ate raw food. So we didn't need the massive arsenal of guts that our ancestors had after they adopted a cooked food diet. And so how did that work? These creatures, these pre-humans, started eating a cooked diet of soft food, and those with smaller guts that were born naturally with slightly smaller guts did a bit better. Why? Because their bodies were saving energy. Their bodies were not spending part of their energy, part of their food intake to support a big intestinal system that was not needed. So it gradually vanished, and so we ended up with guts like we have now, smaller. And now this is the thing. And now only able to live on cooked food. We lost the massive arsenal for battling and crunching down and stewing away at a raw diet. Okay, next, our teeth, our molars are very small. So they are very poor instruments for breaking down raw food. Raw food is harder and tougher. Here's an experiment for you. Go and get a piece of raw steak and chew on it. Try it. Chew on it. I guarantee you'll be chewing for about half an hour or so, and your jaw will get really tired, like you've been chewing gum all day. And you'll find that your teeth are not very good at it. Our teeth are not well adapted for that. Our teeth have shrunk because they are adapted to eating a cooked diet that has been greatly softened. Okay, now here is the biggest weakness in Rankin's hypothesis, which is how far back did the control of fire, how far back does it go in history or in our ancestry? And the problem is that the evidence is very patchy, it's missing basically. And so Rankin's critics say, oh, well, you want these early pre-human creatures as long ago as, say, 2 million years ago to be cooking their food, but you have no evidence of fire, or of controlled fire by these creatures anywhere close to that date. So how can we say they were cooking? That's a tough difficulty. But at the same time, it also turns out that the kind of fires that we're talking about don't really leave much trace, or indeed any trace. Since Rankin's book has come out, there have been a lot of studies about how surviving hunter-gatherer groups of humans today, the kinds of fires that they make in the bush when they catch small animals or whatever, and scientists have observed how they make their fires, cook the animal, eat it, and so forth. And then they look at what's left. And this is not the kind of big log fire that you might imagine from a movie or something. They're really quite small pieces of wood. There's no substantial remains that could be preserved or fossilized or survive. After a week or so, the ashes have just blown away and there's nothing there. So indeed, we probably will never find evidence of controlled fire use going that far back in time. But there is some evidence that fire goes back very far indeed, but it's, so as you can see from the graph, he's sort of put it down as undoubted paths, convincing sites, and contested sites. But it does go back very far. I think I may have mentioned when I talked about Neanderthals that they had fire too. I just find that so spooky that there was another species of human that made campfires too. And they weren't us. They were somebody else. Okay, next important point about a cooked food diet is that cooked food provides or gives the body of the eater far more energy than that food would give you if you ate it raw. That's why the raw foodist people lose so much weight, even though they're eating really healthy food in vast quantities. And it's very clear from this graph here that just a slight increase in energy-rich food available, say, to chimpanzees or to anything else equals an increase in fertility. So here, 4 months quicker to conceive for chimps who have access to ripe fruit. They're most energy-rich food. So those who adopted cooked food had a lot more energy, would have been a lot more reproductively successful. So there's a connection between cooking and sex. Darwin would have loved it. Right, now here he talks about problems with the current system of our nutritionists and the measuring of digestibility of foods. Because the traditional way to do that has been to measure, well, how should I put this delicately? To measure what comes out the other end, okay? And to measure what And you know what nutrients went in, and then you measure what's come out, and then you subtract. You say, right, that's how much the person got. But that turns out to be incorrect. In fact, it's the ileal digestibility before food gets to the last part of our intestines, where there's this large quantity of bacteria that do their own eating of what's in your intestines. And that completely alters the computation. So there are some people who have had an operation where their digestive system ends at the ileal, and we're able to see the difference between food that only goes that far in the digestive system as compared to food that goes all the way out. And there's a big difference between the two. That's what this slide is about. Well, this slide actually goes on about the same thing. So, cooking increases the digestibility of food. So, he takes the perfect example of the egg. What could be more nutritious than a nice egg, right? It is evolved to nurture a chick, to make an animal, right? It's animal food made by the mother, and it's everything that little chick needs to grow and hatch. I almost said be born. I guess that's not correct. It's hatch, right? And indeed, bodybuilders for many years recommended eating as much as 36 raw eggs a day, because it seems to them that raw egg is pure protein, right? Unadulterated, natural. And so, Arnold Schwarzenegger and people like that. Can you just imagine plunking down all those eggs? But they were wasting their time. I think the steroids helped, actually. So yeah, they may have been packing on massive muscles, but it wasn't the raw eggs. They would get far more energy, far more protein if they ate cooked eggs. The reason is that the digestive system has to do a lot of work to break down the raw egg into a digestible state. And so that has an energy cost. Therefore, the final energy output amount that is required from your food, once you take that subtraction out, is not so great. Whereas if it's cooked, it's pre-digested for you, and it's very easy for your body to digest, and you get loads of energy and other goodies. The other thing that cooking does, of course, is that it makes foods, how should I say, healthier. In other words, I mentioned food poisoning before, right? Food poisoning comes from food where, say, for example, the cook may have touched a piece, something raw, and then touches your food and then gives it to you, and then you get sick. Just from that little bit of contact from a bit of raw food. This happened to some visitors who came to stay with me in Singapore a couple of years ago. I took them for a steamboat. I wanted to show them, this is really nice, try it out. And I didn't notice that they were taking the bits of raw seafood and so forth and putting them in the soup, but they didn't put they used the same chopsticks to then eat with. So of course those chopsticks were tainted with raw seafood, and they got very sick. So, but when the raw seafood or whatever it is, when it is cooked, it's in essence sterilized. You're not only breaking down the material, the plant or animal material that you're cooking, but you're also killing off all the bacteria and other nasty stuff in it. Almost all. Hopefully all. So you can see from when something goes wrong that we're rather sensitive to getting that right. Okay. The other thing it does is softening the texture of food. Cooking it makes it softer. So it's not only easier to eat, to chew, but it's just easier for your digestive system. So this has been proved also on experiments with animals. So for example, they gave a group of mice a hard food diet, and the others a soft food diet. And the soft food diet ones get nice and fat, because soft food is just easier for them to digest, so they get more out of it. The hard food, their bodies have to do more work to break it down. So they get less energy out of it in the end, so they end up as skinny mice. Any of you looking for dieting tips, you should be taking notes. In fact, I told Richard, I told him that he was missing out big time. I said, you should skip being a primatologist and you should write the world's most amazing diet book. Right? Evolutionary diet book. Follow my diet book and I guarantee you will lose loads of weight. And just don't mention anything about becoming sterile and so forth. But he'll make a killing. So what he has done, by the way, and I said he's a primatologist, for decades he has followed chimpanzees through the forest to observe what they eat. And they, oh, I see, they eat the leaves, that kind of shrub or whatever. And then, this is the great part, he's actually tried everything that chimpanzees eat. So all the nuts, all the fruit, all the leaves, raw meat, he's tried it all. Conclusion number one from this research, and come on, you have to say respect. This is really hardcore research, right? Conclusion number one, to a human being, chimpanzee food is disgusting. It tastes horrible. It's very hard and difficult or impossible to chew, for us to chew up, even though the chimps are doing just fine. And you cannot live on it. So even the human groups who live in the same region as chimpanzees, if there's a war or something and they're forced to go off in the forest and flee, they'll starve to death. We cannot live on chimp food. It's not chimps. But they can, because they've got the teeth and they've got massive guts compared to us to digest all of this raw stuff. Well, that's the mouse example. The other thing they did was they took a poor snake and force-fed it two different kinds of food. One, what was it? They gave it a whole rat, that is an uncooked rat. Okay. So raw rat, fed it, and then they gave it the same amount of beef, raw beef. And basically there was no difference. So then they gave the snake the same amount of cooked beef. And by the way, you don't want to see how they did this. It was by force-fed the poor snake its meat. I don't know, maybe they like it. But anyway, and they measured all sorts of things that resulted from the digestion of an identical quantity of raw versus cooked meat. And there were all sorts of advantages for the snake, in the sense that it had to spend less energy, it had to breathe less oxygen, all sorts of factors resulted showing that it is easier for an animal, not just us, to benefit from softer food, and in particular cooked food. By the way, think about this. If you have a pet, a dog or a cat, the food you buy for them is cooked. Which is one reason why a lot of pets get overweight. Because the cooked food is very, very easy for their digestive systems to handle. It's not just overfeeding, although that's a problem too. But the fact that they're being given food that is so easy for them to digest, their bodies don't have to do what they would normally do to break down a raw diet. There is actually a popular feeding system for pets called the raw meaty bone diet. Google it if you want. A friend of mine in Cambridge actually tried this with his cat. It's quite interesting. The theory is that the natural food for a cat is raw birds and mice and so forth. Well, it's kind of hard to get a good supply of raw, dead songbirds and mice to feed your cat, but you can buy chicken wings. And so you can just give your cat raw chicken wings, and they love it. They get to use all those special cutting teeth that they would use on real prey. And they claim, the supporters of this claim, that it has all sorts of virtues, that it breaths smells better, their coats are shinier, their guts are healthier, they don't get overweight, and even it's supposed to make them a little cleverer, because instead of just sticking their snout in a bowl of mush, which requires zero intelligence, well, you have to know where the bowl is, but that's about it. With the chicken wing, the cat has to think about positioning it and getting the bones, and there's an internal structure with the bones and so forth. They eat the whole thing. That's natural cat food. So it's good for them, but it's just not very practical. I tried it, and it just, God, it makes a mess. You don't want bloody raw chicken chunks all over your kitchen floor. Not good. But anyway, it's awesome. Actually, this doesn't work in Singapore. I tried it one day, and the chicken wings stank horribly by evening because things raw so much quicker in Singapore. But anyway, they actually rang him to put the raw meaty bone diet in the next edition of his book and see how that works out. Because I'm sure it would back up the findings that he's got here. So in terms of human beings, and this is speaking hypothetically, of course, when did this shift to eating a cooked diet supposedly occur? Well, Wrangham argues from the anatomical evidence, right, because there's no evidence of fires. We know that they were already eating meat for, a very long time. But when did they start cooking? And he argues it's not the Australopithecines, like Lucy, but the Homo erectus, who is the skeleton in the center there, who has a narrower rib cage showing smaller guts than the earlier forms, and slightly bigger brain perhaps. So, and the jaw has become shortened, and the teeth are smaller. And he says these features show that they were eating a soft diet, that it must have been cooked food. So that if he's right, then our ancestors were eating cooked food even before they evolved into modern humans. So that eating cooked food goes even further back than we ourselves. So that would really mean that cooked food is our natural food. It's the natural thing to do after all. Okay, it's 3:45, so it's time for a 5-minute break. We'll start again in 5 minutes. These creatures, I put them in special masticating machines where they take the casts of the teeth made from a hard material. They're exactly the same shape. And then they put some raw meat in there, and then they let them chomp away. And then they can compare that with the teeth of other creatures. And Homo erectus' teeth are, like ours, rubbish for chomping on raw meat. They just don't work. They're no good at it. So, that means they must have been eating a soft diet. The change that Wrangham argues that this difference makes between eating a soft, cooked diet versus eating a hard, tough, raw diet is massive. And you might not realize this, but think about it. Chimpanzees spend half of their waking life chewing. They've got a lot of work to do. Chewing all day long. And when you're chewing, there's not that much else you can do. We spend an hour or less chewing in a day. Vastly less. So we have a lot more time to do, other things. And it's not just the size and shape of the teeth, but there have been also differences that have changed in our ancestry, such as the power and strength of our jaw muscles have become lessened. We're really slack jaws, lackers. We have very weak jaws compared to, say, a chimpanzee. The bite power of a chimpanzee is, so don't get in a fight with one, vastly stronger than yours. Look at a gorilla. If you remember, I've shown you the skulls of gorillas before. They have this big sort of bony crest on the top. That's the attachment point for massive muscles for the gorilla to chomp through vegetation all day long, like a grinding mill. Just crunch, 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 massive muscles crunching this herbiage, this roughage that you just couldn't eat it. You cannot. It would be like you going out and trying to eat a bag full of straw. You can't. And it wouldn't be very pleasant either. The other argument being that however these early creatures discovered cooking, Ragnar thinks it wouldn't have taken very long. If they already had fire, please. If they already controlled fire, it doesn't take long for creatures that are kind of pretty clever, as clever as a chimpanzee or as an orangutan. Come on, they can do DIY. Such creatures that have campfires every night. Interference, what are you doing? The chance that some of the food that they prepare should be left next to the fire during the night, or should get kicked in during the night if somebody's rolling around in their sleep, or so otherwise become accidentally heated, accidentally cooked, is really high. If you consider hundreds of campfires, in a whole region for hundreds of years, there's going to be some food ending up in or near the fire sooner or later. And it only takes once for somebody to say, oh damn, my food got in the fire. But it's not burned to a crisp, so I'll eat it anyway. And to find that, whoa, it's really soft now. And it tastes better. And it's done. Throw the food in the fire next time. It's a lot easier. I didn't have to spend 3 hours chewing it. But instead only, say 20 minutes or whatever it was. So the discovery of cooking could have been very rapid once these creatures had fire. Now another reason why Wrangham argues, again, there's no clear evidence that they had fire. He argues that another reason why they probably did, in his view, is that Homo erectus was now no longer a climber, like the Australopithecines that were before them, like Lucy. Lucy was still a climber and a walker. So even though they walked upright, like us, they were still climbers, which probably means that they climbed and slept in trees at night for safety. We know from the fossil evidence these creatures were still preyed on by leopards and lions and so forth. Right? We're defenseless creatures, and so were they. They didn't have big canine teeth, don't have claws, were not as big as an elephant. We are prey to other carnivores. So sleeping in trees for safety, obviously went on for a very long time. But what about the Homo erectus? They were no longer climbers. They were like us. I mean, okay, you could climb a tree if you want, but I dare you to go and sleep in one. We're not very good at it. And to build a nest in a tree, as chimpanzees do every night, with only 2 hands to hold on, is not very likely. I think Wrangham's tried that too, probably. So he thinks that they had already had and controlled fire. With a fire on the ground, you can sleep outside at night with nasty predators all around, because they will stay away. So fire might have made it possible for these walking apes, who maybe still climbed in the trees and slept at night, to give that up altogether. They can now stay on the ground all the time, with their fire there to protect them, and their fire there to cook their food. That's Wrangham's logic. The other big anatomical difference is visible on this slide. Smaller guts. Right? Eating the soft diet, he says, would explain why the erectus has this smaller rib cage compared to the more barrel-chested shape of the Australopithecines. So if that's true, then we are looking at the invention or the advent of cooking about 2 million years ago with Homo erectus. I think it's quite a profound thought that cooking has been around all that time. Now you might be asking yourselves, if cooking is so great as this, then why doesn't everyone do it? Or why doesn't every species do it? Why don't chimps do it? Well, what do you think the answer could be? It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't have fire. Nothing else has fire. So nothing else can stumble on cooking, can they? Because it's just not possible. If you don't have campfires, then you can't ever drop your food in it. So the creatures that were the first to adopt the use of fire. Where does fire come from? There are many natural sources of fire. Volcanic eruptions send fiery stones flying all over the countryside, which start fires. Lightning starts fires all the time, and there are other natural causes of brush fires and so forth occasionally take place. And once you have some fire, it's quite easy to keep it alive. And also, if you have, say, the smoldering remains of a fire from last night, all you have to do is get some dry grass, a bit of careful blowing, and you can bring those, bring the fire back to life. So, I would say, this is my own opinion, that it's almost certain that those creatures could not make fire. I remember that they're probably not smarter than chimps, but they could probably keep it going by adding more fuel and carrying it with them. They can carry a burning stick. In modern times, all human groups in the world ever discovered, ever know how to make fire, except for one. Anybody know which one? The Tasmanians. Tasmania, the island south of Australia. When they were discovered by Europeans, they were the most primitive, that is, their technology was the most primitive of any existing group of humans. They didn't have boats, they didn't have bow and arrow, and they could not make fire. But like all humans, they had fire, and they cooked every day, but they had to carry a smoldering stick with them to make the campfire the next night. And okay, sometimes it rains, or sometimes your smoldering stick might go out, but you can always get one from another group. But no one could make fire. They didn't know how to make it. Because there was such a small population of Tasmania, had been cut off there from the rest of Australia after the last ice age, when all the ice melted, the sea levels rose, and Tasmania was cut off. And so the Tasmanians, without contact to any other humans in the world, and the smallest population, they lost a lot of things through, I don't know, time, accident, whatever it was. And so they were the only humans in the world who could not make fire. Even though humans are pretty damn clever. So these creatures, I would think, they didn't have a lighter, they didn't have matches, and they probably could not rub sticks together or anything like that. So you have to think of, when you think of them possessing fire, think of this in its most primitive possible way of just being able to keep fire going, nothing more, and then cooking starting from there. Okay, so the other hypothesis, the meat-eating hypothesis of human origins, was that our ancestors went from a diet eating a little meat, like the Australopithecines, to the more primitive, the later creature, the Homo habilis and so forth, shifting to being more of a meat eater, but eating raw meat. And that it was the meat diet that led to them becoming Homo erectus, and then Homo erectus into modern humans. And Random argues, I think quite persuasively, that just this meat diet alone is not enough. He also argues that it's a slightly male chauvinistic sort of theory, because it implies that men, the hunters, that's what we are, and the hunters, so goes this theory of me, I'm not saying that, are the ones who bagged all the game, brought home all the meat, and they made us into modern humans, right? Through the skill of male hunters. And you ladies had nothing to do with it. You just sat around at home like berries. which were obviously irrelevant to evolution. It was the hunters, man and the hunter. So these very popular theories for many, many years that it was this that. Well, Raymond's theory is actually turns that completely around and argues that hunters are actually, at least as far as hunter-gatherers who are still alive today, still persist in that way, don't get that many kills. It's really hard to catch and kill animals with primitive tools and weapons, whereas the food gathered by women, who are often burdened by babies or children, would probably have provided the majority of the food for almost all of humanity for almost all time. And that, of course, cooking it meant that it was the women who were responsible for making us what we are. That's one of the implications of Raymond's theory. Now, I want to show you something very special. This is a clip I think is amazing. It's slightly longer than the clips I usually show you. Now, I want you to imagine this ancient period in which you had these very early humans with very, very simple technology, sharpened sticks or with stones chipped into pointy shapes and so forth, but basically not that much else, just having nothing but our bodies and some stones and sticks. Okay? But thanks to cooking and eating the cooked diet, Raymond argues that this surplus of energy, which meant the reduction of these anatomical structures I've been mentioning, particularly the guts getting smaller, but having a supercharged energy diet now meant that our bodies had lots of energy. And he argues that the direct result of that was that we evolved in a way that wasn't otherwise possible, which was to evolve even bigger brains, which of course we've got really big brains. And as you probably already know, they are hugely energy costly. You've probably read before that statistics are something like 20% of your calorie intake goes to fuel your brain. That's a hugely energy costly organ. Imagine yourselves as primitive cavemen, where getting food is hard. And yet those people developed an organ that was so costly. Right? That's the trade-off. That the cooked diet gave enough energy to make that possible. And then the big brain made lots of other things possible. So I think it's a very interesting story. You see how these stories, these theories change over time. So for example, remember the early theory was that, just after the time of Darwin, they thought that some primitive ape creatures got really big brains and clever, and then realized or thought about walking on two legs, and that the big brains came first, and then walking came, right? That was the early theory. And then when they found all these fossils, they realized, no, small brain things were walking on two legs. That came first. And then big brains came. And now the debates are about, okay, we know that these creatures started walking, and then they had other anatomical changes, and then finally their brains swelled up to an enormous size. But how to explain it? I think cooking does seem to do the job. Now, this clip is a film of a tribe in Africa that perform, actually I think David Attenborough explains everything in the clip itself. They perform what's called the persistence hunt. Okay. Observe.
Leap of the imagination. And as far as we know, only human beings have ever done that. But once it's been done, identifying the tracks in the simplest terms is not difficult.
Oops, okay, I cut off the first sentence or two by mistake. What he's saying there is that only human beings can recognize tracks on the ground. No other animal can do that because of our super big brains, because we're super clever. Other animals just don't see that. Of course, they have other advantages. They can follow a scent trail, which we cannot do because we have a terrible sense of smell compared to other animals. Oh, yeah, I'll give you one aside here. Years ago, when I was a PhD student, I went hunting with a group called the Trinity Foot Beagles. It's Trinity College Foot Beagles. It's a kind of ancient hunting where people take a group of beagles, they're really cute little wacky tails. It's kind of similar to fox hunting, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of, but this is a more primitive version where you just walk behind this huge pack of yapping, happy, tail-wagging beagles, and they hunt by scent only. And they hunt hares. This is all banned now because hunting with dogs has been banned. But anyway, I think really pointless because in fact it's a rubbish way of getting a hare. Because it was the most. I went 3 or 4 times and they never got a hare. A man with a gun could kill a load of them in one day, but a pack of beagles cannot anyway. So one day we actually saw a hare run up a hill. This is a hillside that was just dirt. It was plowed fields that hadn't been planted yet. And then we all saw this big hare running up the hillside. And so we all pointed to the leaders of the men who lead the hunt. There goes one there. And yip, yip, yip came the beagles along, and they came along the scent line, obviously. And they're yipping and yipping, really excited, and like, oh, fresh hair, fresh hair. And they went, whoo, in the wrong direction. Because they couldn't tell. They knew that the hare just ran along this line, but because they didn't use their eyes, they didn't see it. They only used their sense of smell, and so they went in exactly the wrong, and their controllers were blowing horns and whistles and cracking whips, trying to make them turn around, but they were so excited that they just kept running in the wrong direction. Human beings, we've got excellent vision, and most importantly, we've got these big brains, which make all of these things possible. But think about it, only we can recognize what tracks are, that they are the imprint of the feet of animals that may have been there days before, or in rain, or in other conditions when scent won't work, or when it has not lasted that long. Okay, so that's the background to what David is talking about. Big brain ability to recognize animal tracks.
I know that those are the tracks of an eland. But there are some people that can interpret even the faintest marks on the ground. They hunt in silence. The hand sign indicates that one of them has found the track of a group of kudu. These are the sand people of the Kalahari Desert, the last tribe on earth to use what some believe is the most ancient hunting technique of all, the persistence hunt. They run down their prey. They start to feel the rhythm of the animal's movements from the spacing of the tracks. The group is not moving fast. The animals have taken fright. They will concentrate on the bull. He will be carrying a heavy set of horns and therefore will tire more quickly. To do that, we must separate him from the herd so that his tracks won't be confused by those of others. The sun is directly overhead, and the men sense a change in the kudu's pace. He's slowing. After hours of tracking, they've entered an almost trance-like state of concentration. At times it's impossible to see any sign of the kudu's tracks, and the hunters must imagine the path it would have taken. The heat is hard on the hunters, but they're now close enough for the next stage of the hunt, the chase. This is a signal for it to begin. Only one man will undertake it. Koroe, the runner. He must be relentless. It's now a test of endurance. Who will collapse first, the man or the animal? This was how men hunted before they had weapons, when a hunter had nothing more than his own physical endurance with which to gain his prize. Running on 2 feet is more efficient over long distances than running on 4. A man sweats and glands all over his body and so cools himself. A kudu sweats much less and has to find shade if it's to cool down. And a man has hands with which to carry water, so during the chase he can replenish the liquid he loses as sweat. Hours pass and Koroe is getting closer. But then the kudu runs into thick cover. The tracks have disappeared. Koroe tries to put himself into the mind of the kudu and himself reenacts the moment when it heard him approaching as it tried to rest in the shade. He deduces the direction in which it must have fled. It's the spy.
It's so exhausted it cannot run anymore. That's why he's able to approach
The chase has lasted 8 hours. Hunter and hunted are both at the end of their strength. Neither can go on much longer. And then the kudu collapses from sheer exhaustion. It's close to death. Koroe's spear throw now is scarcely more than a symbolic gesture. The hunter pays tribute to his quarry's courage and strength with ceremonial gestures that ensure that its spirit returns to the desert sands from which it came. While it was alive, he lived and breathed with it and felt its every movement in his own body. And at the moment of its death, he shared its pain. He rubs its saliva into his own legs to relieve the agony of his burning muscles. And he gives thanks for the life he has taken so that he may sustain the lives of his family waiting for him back in their settlement.
So, who would have thought it that human beings could have devised such a thing. Now, of course, it's not just the possession of great intelligence that allows people to hunt like that, because they can track animals that they cannot see over long distances. But it's also the fact, and this is typical of how evolution works, that things that originally evolved for another purpose can sometimes become adapted to different ends. So like the swim bladder in fishes, that was originally to preserve their buoyancy in water, but in later fishes it turned out that those who lived in oxygen-poor water could gulp air into their swim bladder and it became a primitive lung. The structure was there originally for buoyancy, but it later could be used for something else. Similar with our upright walking on two legs, probably originally for some other purpose, right? Well, we don't know. Was it the aquatic ape theory? I don't know, but whatever it was that led those early creatures to start walking on two legs, perhaps it was to simply walk between isolated patches of forest because there wasn't enough food to live in one patch, and you had to be able to move from patch to patch. Or it was the tree down hypothesis, that walking on two legs actually started while still in the trees. Gibbons sometimes run down the trees, on tree limbs on their hind legs with their long arms sticking out. And orangutans, a large percentage of their movement in trees is actually on their hind legs. So it may be a combination of all of these things that led to a family of creatures walking on their hind legs. But anyway, by the time you get to a later creature, which were extremely efficient walkers on two legs, they became also good runners. And it turns out, it happens to work, that running on two legs is more efficient over long distances. Right, now this was a happy accident that came around later. And there are other arguments for the existence of long-distance running is actually something that's very ancient in our past. It's been claimed that human beings have the ability to run a long distance without any training at all, in a way that would kill any other animal. So, for example, I don't know, if you, let's say you were to chase a cat, screaming and scaring it, and chase a cat as far as you wanted, that wouldn't go very far. After about half an hour or so, it would just collapse and would have to rest, panting. That could have made it pretty far. It actually managed 8 hours, but it was also, it's so much faster than the human that it was running and taking breaks. When the human got close, it would run again. That's how it lasted 8 hours. But we have an unusual ability that you could, right now, if someone came running after you with a gun and didn't stop, you could run flat out, as fast as you can go, for a really long way and not die. Okay? That's on average, okay? Maybe one or two of you would die, but on average, you have this ability in you. Without any training, without being a long-distance runner, your body can do that. And that is, I think, highly suggestive that running down prey, or maybe also equally running away from predators, was something that goes way back in our history, which was widely shared by all human beings. Yeah, I think we tend to forget ignoble things, like running away. I suppose many of you are Monty Python fans, but there's a great running away quote there. Anyway, running away, yes. Maybe we could outrun some of our predators. Actually, we're not that fast. So I don't think that's probably it, because we're efficient at running long distances. But we're not as fast as for most four-legged animals. And we're not super sprinters either. So yeah, we're probably running down things with a stick or something. The possession of, then of course, the possession of hands means that we can carry a stick or some other object, which allows us to extend our reach, and we can keep. Don't try this at home or anywhere else. But you can keep a nasty predator at bay with a big stick. Many people have been forced to do this, and it does work. You can keep a hyena away from you by poking it or participating. So, sorry, the battery died. By waving something away from your body and in the face of the predator, you can keep them at bay. In fact, David Attenborough demonstrates this in another documentary where he runs up on some group of scavengers on a carcass in Africa, waving a stick, and they all run away. Even though we are not dangerous animals, per se, we don't have any natural weapons. But with just these basic things, you can see that these animals that could run long distances on their two legs, and with the cleverness to track, so for the men to make primitive weapons, had an excellent package that worked very, very well. Now, Reagan argues for even more consequences from the introduction or adoption of eating cooked food. And these are more tenuous than the other things that I've discussed so far. Which is, he argues that it must have had, well, in general, he must be right, that it must have had major effects on the social structure of these early ape creatures, Homo erectus and so forth. Because if they were no longer forced to chew for 7 hours a day, but now clustered around cooking places where food had to sit for a time and then could be eaten in a shorter time, this would have dramatically, he argues, dramatically changed the social arrangements of these creatures. Particularly, he thinks that women probably did the cooking, and that because they're usually not able to run around all day as free as men are, because they're burdened by children. But this would also explain the universal tendency in all cultures on Earth that cooking is normally associated with women. Why should that be? There's nothing about cooking that cannot equally be done by a man's body. We have hands and eyes. We can stir things and why should cooking be more for a woman's sake? And often these things are attributed to traditional values or something like that. But such things are ad hoc explanations that only go back. What are they supposed to go back 200 years? Well, how long are these traditional values? How old are they supposed to be? That's not very old. For an explanation that is supposed to apply to humans as a whole, you need to go much further back. You have to go more than 200,000 years back, because that's how long modern humans have been around, for around 200,000 years. So, this association with women cooking, and then he argues that this may have changed the structure of us to become more monogamous, in that a woman sitting around tending a fire and cooking food and so forth is vulnerable. Thinking of the fire all afternoon, tending it and so forth, and maybe some food is already cooked, it's sitting nearby, so vulnerable to theft by those dangerous creatures, bachelors. Bachelor males, very dangerous. They're roaming around, they've got nothing to lose, and they would be perfectly happy to steal food from a woman. And so Reagan argues that having a male partner, or mate, or husband, would allow a woman the security to carry on with the cooking and not have to worry about theft, or if theft occurred, she could refer to her husband or male relatives to go and beat up the bachelor and make him stop stealing food. And possibly then also on that's for women. Then on the men's side, the idea is that this would free men up even more to be sort of creatures they turned out to be. In other words, spending all their time sleeping under trees, gossiping with other men, doing secret men rituals that make them feel really important. And going out and hunting and then coming back claiming that they're masters of the universe because they killed a squirrel or whatever it was, which we know human groups still do. So, he argues that because most hunting expeditions fail. Now, you cannot have a species that most of its hunting expeditions fail and it still is alive and well. Whereas if the women are back at the campsite and have cooked food, which is enough for them to eat in the evening in a short meal, and fully fuel them, keep them alive and healthy, and able to keep up this useless, wasteful lifestyle, all's well in the end, right? So, yes, it's plausible what he argues, but we cannot be sure. So, another thing. Oh, yeah, cute babies. Except for the one on the right. Filthy. So, another consequence to cooking is early weaning. Now, chimpanzees are weaned only between the ages of 4 and 5. Can you imagine breastfeeding for 4 or 5 years? Well, I can't because I can't breastfeed, but it would be a really long time. And what that means is that while a mother is breastfeeding, normally there is a phenomenon called lactational amenorrhea, I believe, which usually means that she cannot become fertile again and reproduce until she's stopped. And then she can become fertile again and have another baby. That means, for humans, because human infants are able to start eating soft, super digestible, cooked food very early. Hence, early weaning exists in our species, which means higher reproduction, higher reproductivity. So that all makes perfect sense. And yes, I mentioned this before. The massive change in what we spend our lives doing. Instead of spending the entire day chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing, we have been given this gift, as it were, of a vastly greater amount of time with which to do things during the day. So as to start creating complex culture, complex traditions, discover things, and so on and so forth, all those other things that make us humans. So the part I want you to particularly remember is the idea about the increase in brain size being made possible, being literally fueled by the adoption of a cooked food diet, which is now something to which we are completely adapted. So to recap, cooked food diet starts, guts got smaller, teeth got smaller and duller, less sharp. Jaws got smaller, jaw muscles got weaker, lots of reductions. Okay? But then brain got much bigger. All of this can be explained by cooked food, by the cooking hypothesis. So, cooking, greater energy, greater safety, ease of eating. He argues that this would be since Homo erectus, let's just say around 2 million years ago, and then having all of these amazing and unexpected consequences. I'm sure that you will never thought of this before, that all the food you eat is cooked. It's so omnipresent, you never think about it. Just like you don't think about the air next to your face. You don't think about it, it's just there. It's so constant, there's no point in thinking about it. But think about it from now on. Everything you eat, everywhere you go, it's been cooked. And there are tiny exceptions that really have nothing to do with the rule. We live and subsist on food that has been cooked. And that is so because we are biologically adapted to eat cooked food. So, in Rangan's terms, we are not the naked ape, we are the cooking ape. Okay, that's And you, if you have questions.